Okay, here we are in Florida. We're visiting with Clive Baker, and we have in front of us 5 out of the 6 cars that Clive has raced at Le Mans. And Clive, would you like to start with number 50?
50. Well, I'm just impressed to see all these cars here, and even I'm there. Look, that's cool. And where did I want to know? First of all, I know I drove them, but where did you get them all from, Bill? That's more interesting to me.
This is a model from England, and it was produced in the early 70s.
Right. Well, it's wonderful. Good detail. It's so long ago for me to remember very much about what I did in those days, but it's just, you're bringing back a lot of memories to me right now, seeing these cars. And I know we won the class at Le Mans, and I think the top speed we did was 151 miles an hour down the Mulsanne Straight. And I think that's recorded somewhere, or you may argue with me and say it's different, but
no,
it was close to it, I think.
Probably the fastest a Sprite ever went.
That's right, that's right. But it's just wonderful to see them. I mean, and the actual colour of the Transporter was what our works cars were. I mean, obviously these colours were what we had to run at the time, but Donald's colours were this colour for the works cars. And this model, I know I'm looking at the other ones underneath, but this model is very interesting to me because there's a history of it being made, and made out of wood, and probably the only one in the world. Quite amazing.
Well, what about the car itself? Number 47 was a SR car.
Yes, it was, yeah. Well, at that time when Donald decided that he was struggling at that time with British Leyland and the factory of being able to get funds to keep his racing team going, and he felt that he should build a car which would potentially could be a winner at Le Mans. Now, at that time, and I've only spoken to a few people about it, but Donald used to confide in me a lot about the racing because I drove for him for about 9 years. But when this project was underway, we wanted to run with a GT40 engine in it. In other words, a big Ford engine, V8. Because of getting the fundings to do it, Donald obviously couldn't get the funding, and the only way was then to run it with the Climax engine in. And he was a great friend of Wally Hassan of Coventry Climax, and I used to know Wally quite well. And the actual engine we had to use was Jimmy Clark's championship winning engine from the year before. But the car was really built originally to run a bigger engine, up to 5 litres. And had we gone in that direction, I'm sure the Healey name would have been much more successful at Le Mans that year we ran the car. But we couldn't get the funding, and so the only way was to downgrade and run a 2-litre engine. So really the car was underpowered for the car that he had designed.
Underpowered. Not often that you hear that about a Healey.
No.
What about number 37? It looks like it's almost the same car.
Well, there's a few refinements on it. We did some more development work with the car on the track, and we ended up putting a little more downforce on it with the spoilers. And my teammate that year was John Harris, and in fact he worked on the very original project with Jeff Healey, because he had another pal who had a GT40, and a lot of the ideas were hashed from a GT40 at the time of the building of the first car. And John was a lot taller than me, and so we had a little bubble put in the car so John could sit in and drive it, because when we changed drivers I was obviously lower in the car, but we had a happy medium with it, so it worked out fine. But as you know, the story went that we didn't have any success with the cars, unfortunately, and it was a great pity really, because I think the car had a huge potential, but at the end of the second year that was the end of really Donald's cars at Le Mans, and I was proud to drive both of them.
Well, let's talk about your earlier years. Let's open up this little transporter here and bring out a couple of other cars. Here's a number 48.
Yeah.
And evidently you liked number 48 because here's another number 48.
Yeah.
This is from 1965 and 66.
Yeah. The thing is with me, to see these models now is wonderful because you couldn't get them in those days. But you'll have to talk me through it because it was a long time ago. Now, I'm trying to think who I drove this one with.
Well,
And that would have been, we've got a book here, Bill.
We can probably look that up.
Car. Originally, it was a Dayglow green.
Yeah, like this.
That's right. That's the actual. And the reason why we had the car that colour, Jeff was concerned about the speed differential between our cars, which were running like 150 mile an hour, whereas against the big Porsches, 917s and GT40s, they were running at just around 200 miles an hour. So you had a speed differential, say, of an average of 60 miles an hour. And at night, it was very important that we could be seen, because it would be quite a frightening situation to get shunted up the rear end by one of those cars with a speed differential of 60 miles an hour. But they made us change the colours. The organisers at Le Mans said, oh, it was too bright, and the car should be changed colour. So literally overnight, they resprayed the car the different colour which you now see today.
Yeah, and here you can see a picture of the car.
That's right.
As it was, and that pretty well matches the color of the model.
Yeah.
Now I noticed this car has 4 headlights in there. How was your lighting at Le Mans?
Well, it was done by Lucas. It was extremely good, really. The biggest problem in racing at night, and it happens today, the guys coming up behind you never dip the lights, and and you can imagine when you're racing in the rain that you get the water on the rear screen of the car, and obviously on your windshield, and the lights are coming behind you. It just dazzles you. So we decided that we needed to have some good lights as well, and that's why we ended up with the 4 lights. And it really, at night, the difference between the lap times in the daylight hours and at night was only about 4 to 5 seconds difference, because you get into a rhythm of driving that situation. But we did have a dip situation where we had, I think it was the 2 outer ones on the dip. It gave us a good spread in the turn, so you could actually see in the corner, in the S's and at the slow corners. It was important to see the clipping point in the turn itself. But on full beam, obviously, we had the 4 on, so that was the story on that. And I think we also had, if I remember right, we also had a colour marker, and we couldn't show, but we did have a colour marker on them as well.
Now, there's a yellow dot on
here. Yeah. Well, those dots were, we had a breather. There was a breather pipe on them. Can you remember? Can you see that in the picture at all? Does that show it?
No, I don't
think it does.
Don't know if it does or not.
We had a little breather pipe there. No, it doesn't. No, that's right. Yeah, it doesn't show it, but we did have a breather pipe. There,
yeah, there it is.
There it is. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you can see it there. Look.
Oh yeah, there's the breather.
Yeah. So that was just to really identify, I think, what we had on, and the reason we had to have the colours on was for the class that the car was running in too. So that would have been given to us by the scrutineers at the race. That would give us the colour coding for what class we were actually in, and you could identify easier from the pits. You obviously couldn't see it coming towards you, but you could see it from the side in the pits. So that was that one there. And both the times that I drove these cars was with Rana Altonen, the Finnish driver, and he and I still keep in touch with each other. We send Christmas cards, etc., and we meet up occasionally during a year at a time. But my impression of all this, Bill, is to see that it's wonderful that somebody like yourself keeps the name of the Healey going, and with all these lovely collection of models and you bring to show me. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, I feel like I've shortchanged you, because
no, you haven't.
I only found 5 of the 6 cars that you raced, but the 6th one is in this beautiful book called Les Healeys du Mans, which is by Henri over in France, And there's a car in here which was run in your first year,
Yeah, there's the
which
car.
was
Yeah,
1964.
that's right.
And this is 770 KNX, which was number 53. Since we don't have a model of it, and the only pictures that I've seen of this car are in black and white, what could you tell me about the color of the car, and what was it like your very first time at Le Mans?
Right. Well, actually, I was a third driver the year before there with John Whitmore and Bob Olthoff.
Oh, in
And
the
it-
3000.
No. They ran a Sprite, and Bob Olthoff crashed the car at White House.
Uh-oh.
Now that should be in here.
It would be, yeah.
Is it in here?
Yep. Yes.
It's got to be here somewhere. Here we are, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, it's in here. That's the car, and it should be Bob Olthoff. So I was a third driver, but didn't actually race the car because
Yes,
we are.
it's Olthoff
yeah,
and
yeah,
Whitmore.
yeah, that's right. And then that's the. So there, yeah, that's the car there. That's just so interesting. See, no, that's the car that Mike Garton had then.
Yes.
That's right. So that was my first time there, but getting to say that I was the number one driver in the team was the 64 race, and I was really excited about that. And my co-driver was a chap called Bill Bradley, who you can see in this picture here. That's Bill. He used to be a driver for Midland Racing Partnership that ran Formula 3 cars with David Hobbs and Dickie Atwood. And Dickie Atwood became a very famous, in fact he won Le Mans in a Porsche a few years later.
David Atwood used to race a little bit too,
Yeah.
sort of.
Right. Now, so Bill and I drove together in that car, and unfortunately, there's a little story to this. Bill got so upset when I saw him a year ago. He said there was an article that said that we weren't trying in this car, and he was quite upset about it and wanted to get back to whoever wrote this article in one of the books. And he rang me up and he said, Clive, he said, we really did try, didn't we, in the car? I said, well, as far as I was concerned, we were. But we had a mechanical problem with it, and we had to make the car last as long as we could. And we had an electrical fault with the car. And although we finished quite well down in the end of the event, we had an electrical problem for around about maybe 6.5, 7 hours of the race. And we were lucky that we had a cracked distributor cap. And of course that caused a misfire with it as well. And the person who wrote the article obviously didn't realise this. But for me, the first time there to be leading the Healey team there was exciting. And Jeff always used to take care of us, and he would always get the big stick out. But I was always a bit of a wild one, as you know, through my history of driving for Healeys and not turning up to the last minute. But again, the difference was the speed differential in these cars. I raced some big cars through my career, but the difference was that when you're driving a car like this at Le Mans, and you had the big cars go past you on the straight, the car would move literally 3 or 4 feet across the road just by the actual suction of the air from the rear of the car that had passed you. It would just draw you into the rear of the car. And that was really quite, until you were used to it. There was a Rene Bonnet that crashed the one year there, and the driver was unfortunately killed. The same situation. It was a long wheelbase one, and they got sucked in behind one of the bigger cars, and obviously he tried to correct it as it went in. Being a longer wheelbase, it actually ended up digging in and flipping the car over. So that was the reason. Going back to the colour we was talking earlier on about the Dayglow green and the regular green, was the fact that Jeff wanted the cars to be seen more, so he gave us a bit more vision with the other cars. But this car was the Healey colour. This was the car was this colour.
Healey blue.
Yeah. That car was the Healey blue. So I can remember that. And the other car that I remember, I was with Paul Hawkins was involved with us. When Paul Hawkins and I drove the car at Le Mans, I came and handed the car over. This is just a little bit about the race. And Jeff would say, well, how's the car going, etc., etc., and have a debriefing in the back of the pits. I always remember that one. He was a character, but that was one of the things. I mean, in those days, you couldn't stop and clean up. You had to get out there. The pit stop was to be as quick as we could do it. But on one of the years, it was that year or another year after, we changed brake pads, and the guys were doing it in the middle of the night to put new pads in, and they forgot to put the split pins in. So the first time I used the brakes down at the end of the S, or going into the S's after we leave the pits, go around the corner, suddenly I put the brakes on, it flipped out the pins, flipped out the pads. So now I'm getting down the end of Mulsanne straight, I've got no brakes anyway. All I've got is the actual pots, the pistons, pots coming out and touching the rotor, as metal to metal as a brake. So I had to crawl back to the pits, and then they had to put whole new calipers on. So that we lost a bit of time with that. And I don't think that's ever been mentioned in a story of our drives at Le Mans.
Well, we've appreciated your time and your sharing some stories of the racing. There are so few people that have been as successful in Healeys, both at Le Mans and at Sebring. And I hope you enjoyed the driving as much as we've enjoyed hearing about it.
I did. They were great days. Thanks.